Hello, economics students. In our last lesson, we talked about externalities. And just as a refresher, an externality happens when someone incurs a cost or a benefit of a product or service, even though they are neither the producer nor the consumer of that service. So today we're going to continue with our discussion of externalities by looking at how externalities interact with supply and demand and how we would go about graphing the externality. Sounds fun, huh? Well, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to begin here by showing just a basic supply and demand graph. And I'm going to be showing how a positive externality would be reflected in this graph. So the first thing that I want then to show is what demand would look like if everyone who receives the benefit of the externality actually demanded or paid for the externality. So we have our original demand here, which is DE. But this includes people who are benefiting from the externality who aren't actually demanding the product. So those people who benefit, if we add them to the demand, that would be a rightward shift in the demand line, and we would be at D2. Now, everyone who's benefiting from the externality is actually paying for the externality. And then the area between DE and DT, that is the demand with the externality and total demand if there were no externality, that area between the two demand lines is the positive externality. And then if we look at the quantity QE is the quantity that is purchased including the externality. Quantity QT would be if everyone who receives the benefit purchases the product. We see that there is a difference in quantity demanded, and that difference between QT and QE actually equals the free riders, those who are benefiting today from the service or the product who are not paying for it. They are the free riders, that little section there, that quantity. And finally, we have a shaded area here, and this shaded area inside the triangle ABC is the loss of efficiency that is caused by this positive externality. It basically is lost revenue for producers. And if everyone were paying for the product that they're receiving a benefit for, that would add to the revenue that producers are receiving. As it is a loss of efficiency. They are not getting their maximum revenue on this product from everyone who is actually benefiting from it. So we have free riders, and the free riders equate to lost revenue for the producers. So that's positive externalities. How do we correct a positive externality? Well, there's several options. Basically, one way would be to include consumer subsidies. A subsidy is like a tax credit. It's the opposite of a tax. It's where the government gives people money. And so if we were to give consumer subsidies, that could increase the demand. In other words, the government says, if you buy this product, we will give you a tax subsidy or a tax rebate for buying the product. And as a result, people would go ahead then and more people would demand the product because they're getting a subsidy. It no longer costs as much to the consumer. And that would push demand out to the right. That would be one way to address this issue of the externality. And notice then down here, QE is going to move up to QT ideally, and that will get rid of the free riders. There's another option. We can have a producer subsidy, and this would be a tax credit to those producers who are making the product that has the externality. And what this would do is actually make the cost of production lower. By giving them a tax credit to produce this product, it lowers the cost to the producer. That enables them to supply more of the product. The supply line shifts to the right, and basically it has the same impact. We're going to have, instead of QE, quantity with the externality, it ideally would move over here to Q2, which then is the quantity that's going to be supplied without the externality in existence due to the lower cost of production. That's the second way to address positive externalities. Okay, and then there's a third option. the government can just provide the service for free. And this does happen. If we don't want there to be a positive externality, then let's just give it away. And the government would be the ones who would give it away. So how does this work? What kind of products are government provided in order to eliminate an externality? Well, it's typically used in extreme situations for the public safety, and you could probably think of a few of them. National defense would be one. We don't pay individually for national defense outside of paying our regular taxes, of course, but we don't have an additional fee to provide national defense just for those who want to have national defense. The government provides it for everyone, so there's no externality in defense. Police and fire protection. Same kind of thing. We talked about that in class. It would be feasible to have people pay for their police and fire protection, but that really doesn't make sense. There would always be free riders involved, so the government goes ahead and just provides police and fire protection for everyone. And more recently, vaccinations. Polio vaccinations back in the mid to middle part of the 20th century and moving into the latter part of the 20th century. Children had to receive polio vaccinations before they were allowed to go to school. More recently, of course, COVID-19. The COVID-19 vaccinations have been provided to those people who want them free of charge, and a lot of people therefore are getting the vaccines who otherwise would not have. And that again is to eliminate free riders from the program as much as possible, and of course to make our society safer and more healthy in the process. So that's positive externalities. Let's take a look at negative externalities. And we're going to start the same way with your basic demand and supply. And as you can see, when I make this video in school, I can sometimes get interrupted with an announcement over the loudspeaker. So anyway, we have demand and we have the supply here with the externality. SE stands for supply with the externality. And now I have a supply line T, which is the total supply if there were no externality. Basically, in a negative externality, what's happening is businesses are able to produce the product and they're not bearing the entire cost of the product. And you can think about a company that is spewing a lot of pollution into either the air or into the water. There's a cost. And if they were to clean up their manufacturing process to get rid of that pollution, that would raise their manufacturing costs, their production costs, and that is a supply factor which would decrease supply. Raising production costs decreases supply. So to get rid of that negative externality, getting rid of the pollution, supply would shift to the left, as you see here, less supply. And now the area between SE, supply with the externality, and ST, the total supply without the externality, that then represents that space, the negative externality, all of that space between the two supply lines. And then if we bring down quantity from the two equilibriums, the area between QE and QT represents the over-allocation of resources that result from the negative externality. And basically what this is saying, the area between the quantity between QE and QT would represent free riders, and in this case it's not the consumers who are the free riders but the producers. The producers are not paying for their total production cost, therefore we have producers who are free riders. And then the area but here that you see shaded between triangle A, B, and C, that is the loss of efficiency due to the negative externality. And we can look at that as the cost that is borne by consumers who did not purchase the good. And think about that in the case of pollution. There might not be an immediate financial cost to someone who has to breathe the polluted air, but there is a cost. And the cost would be something such as making their lives less pleasant, breathing polluted air. It could be things like decreased health. If you're breathing polluted air all the time, you're not going to be as healthy. There's a cost there. And ultimately, it could shorten life expectancy. Countries where there are few controls on pollution tend to be the countries that have a relatively low life expectancy. The people who live there are bearing a very serious cost for that negative externality. Even though they may not be the consumer of the good, they might not be working at the factory that makes the good. Nevertheless, by breathing the toxic air or drinking the toxic water, they're bearing a cost, and that is not a good thing, obviously. So how do we address this? Well, there's a couple of options. Option one would be direct control, and that's where the government simply prohibits the production of the externality. They say you cannot spew this stuff into the rivers, you cannot spew this stuff into the air. They prevent the company from being able to create that externality, that negative externality, and that will definitely increase their production costs. If they are no longer allowed to pollute, they have to produce cleanly, their production costs will go up. That means that supply will go down, and now only those people who are actually benefiting from the service are going to be able to get the service. There will be no cost to those who don't want this service that is being provided by this company that's creating the externality. So that's option one. Just say you can't produce, you can't create that externality, you cannot pollute, and that will decrease, that is, shift to the left, your supply line. The second option, the government can impose a tax on the externality. And just like the opposite of a subsidy that we discussed under the positive externality, a tax will increase the production cost. And again, do the same thing as the previous example. It will push the supply line to the left. If they're going to pollute, we're going to tax the pollution. And then by taxing, we increase their production costs, and that will decrease supply, shifting supply to the left and eliminating the externality. Ultimately, that would be the goal. So those are the ways that we can address the negative externalities. In each case, the quantity goes down, the price of the product will go up. Here we have the quantity going down, and ultimately we want to make sure that there is no producer free rider in this negative externality situation. And people who want the product will be forced to pay the entire cost of that product by higher prices than they were otherwise having to pay. So with that, we have covered the supply and demand of externalities, and hope you took good notes. You can bet that you're going to see some of this stuff again in your future. You guys have a great day today, and we'll talk to you later.